is God suggesting is going on in this region?
Saying they're gonna come in and they're gonna take all of that land that is now possessed by these Amorites.
Okay, it's going to take all the land that's possessed by the Amorites. Why? What is implied here? I'm an English teacher. I like implied meanings.
Judge,
It's a judgment, right? Okay. They are growing in iniquity. What is iniquity? It's a big word. Lawlessness, sin, right? They are growing in iniquity, but yet they still have enough people in amongst them now at the time of Abraham that God is not ready to exact his judgment on them yet.
We have several comparison points for God's judgment. Sodom and Gomorrah is one. If you recall Abraham's bargain with God, if you can find 50, 40, 30, he got down to 10. If there were 10, he would spare Sodom and Gomorrah, but there were not, and Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. There's also the promise of what are the example of what happened pre-flood. The name of God has just about disappeared from the land.
It was preserved in basically one family.
Yeah. And I believe firmly that the date of flood dated to the year of the death of Methuselah was on purpose. That Methuselah represented the last of the Sethian line that were faithful to God, other than Noah.
you know what his name meant.
Methuselah, I do not know off the top of my head.
His name meant when he dies, it comes.
When he dies comes, the judgment comes.
And so we have the judgment of God picture.
And so where we have a setting here where God's judgment must come. Now, I also like a particular text. Let me see if I can find it real quick, because I did not write this one down beforehand. But whenever I think about what God does for what God does to these people, to this area, I like the meeting that Joshua had with the angel. Because to me, it speaks a lot of what is going on. And let's see here.
Joshua 2, I think.
No, I think it's when he meets the angel.
Well,
So Joshua is looking at the land and he meets an angel. And where does that happen? That's where, maybe it's a little later. Israel crosses the Jordan. It might be after the first talk of Rahab. I'll let my husband look for that. But I'll just kind of summarize what happens is Joshua is looking forward at the land and looking at what he has to deal with. And he is met by God himself, because he is told to take off his shoes. But when he meets this heavenly being, Joshua asks, are you for me or against me? Are you a friend or a foe?
Joshua 5:13.
Joshua 5:13, okay. Yeah, definitely much later in Joshua than I expected it. So 5:13, he says, and it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said, are you for us or are you for our adversaries, our enemies? And so he said, no, but as commander of the army of the Lord of Yahweh, I have come now. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped him and said, what does my Lord say to his servant? And then the commander, actually, it's verse 14 when he says, are you for us or are you for our adversaries? He says, no. His answer is no.
Mine says neither.
Neither. Okay. So God is not, God is basically saying right here, I am not necessarily taking a side here. But then the next thing he does is he tells him how he's going to destroy Jericho. Now, if I was a member of Jericho, a citizen of Jericho, I was going to say that guy's definitely against me, right? But God doesn't take sides like we take sides. He doesn't look at it as enemy versus friend. But he does look at it as judgment must come. It's a different perspective than our human hearts would see it. But he knows that these people have become evil to a point where they cannot be saved by letting them stay where they're at.
So when we read this in Genesis, it was like a prophecy kind
Of what he was going to be doing when they came to take Canaan, yes. So God saw where the people of Canaan were going. He saw that their morals, their values were deteriorating. In fact, when we study more into the culture of the Canaanites, it's rather abhorrent. They would sacrifice babies to Baal by putting a newborn baby into these burning hands and basically cook the baby alive as a sacrifice.
The Canaanites were also called the Zidonians or the Lebanese. They spread their culture throughout the Mediterranean. The Romans complained about them because they defeated them in Carthage. And they accused them of child sacrifice.
Mhm.
And the Romans both and the Greeks accused the Canaanites of that. And the god that they sacrificed to was Moloch.
Yeah.
So is this kind of like, where Jesus, we're told in the New Testament that there's going to be judgment when after the man of perdition, is that what they call him? Comes to a complete.
Yeah. So when we talk in the great controversy, in light of the great controversy, so I wrote down here in my notes, is this what's happening to Canaan? Is this judgment or is this great controversy going on here? And so when we're looking at things in light of the great controversy, this is one of the things that I think us as Adventists have an advantage, because we understand that this earth is more than just a battle, because we were sinful and we were fallen beings. We know that there is a cosmic battle going on, that sin must come to its fullness and show its fruit, so that in the end, it will never rear its head again. That sin will never, ever be even a temptation to us again. And we might look around and go, like, isn't that obvious, right? Isn't it obvious that this is already like a disaster? So come, but shouldn't it have been obvious then when they're burning babies in the hands of Moloch? Shouldn't it be obvious? But God must let every avenue that we can think of to subvert him play its part. Every idea that we have of having no God must play its part before the end, so that if anyone goes, but what if? I kind of think of like there are people who are advocates of communism. It's like, you look at every communist country in this world today, and it's been a failure. But still, people will argue for communism by saying, well, it just wasn't done right yet. They'll make that argument. Well, we just haven't done it right yet. We have to get to a point where we don't say, but it wasn't done right. To the point of like, there's no way we could do it right. And so God is letting our world play out. But if he lets, I sincerely believe that God will, where places in this world are that have become to the fullness of their iniquity, God allows catastrophe to fall upon them. So I have one example from history that is past biblical times that I think about is the Aztecs. When you think about the Aztecan Empire, it was vast and it was powerful. And they would sacrifice thousands of people in a single day under that empire. That's how powerful they were, is they were able to sacrifice thousands of people with indemnity. And no one could fight against them. And then comes 200 Spaniards, 50 Spaniards, and they bring down an empire. Now, mind you, the Spaniards weren't saints.
They were.
They were not saints. They were not. Well, they believed in God, I guess, but I would not describe them as righteous men per se.
400 of his 500 soldiers. Correction.
Correction, 400 soldiers. Okay, 400, but this is like a massive dynasty of millions. And that small troop of Spaniards brings down a nation. How could they, but for the judgment of God?
Mind you, they developed alliances with other tribes.
Yes, which
Especially
were probably the ones who were having their people assassinated through these sacrifices. They made very strategic alliances. But still, you look at it in the terms of history and power, and it should not have happened. Now, they might have brought it upon themselves by making so many local enemies. If the Spaniards, who were total foreigners, how would they be able to, make the right connections to do this, to bring down that empire? There should have been no way. But it was brought down. I see that as an example of God's judgment coming upon a place or a kingdom where the fullness of their iniquity had come. And so when we look at places, and I'm also reading the book of Job. So you think about that too. Job had everything wiped out. And his friends automatically assumed that it was because he was evil. So then how do we tell whether something is happening because of the great controversy or it is happening because of judgment? And so can anyone have any thoughts about, how do we deal with that dichotomy?
What about, all those moments in the Bible where it says that God showed favor on this one or favor on that one? It doesn't come right out, and maybe we don't think of like judgment, right? Like with Joseph saying,
Right.
like God showed favor on Joseph, but was that a judgment against?
Well, he showed
else, or-
favor on Joseph, but then how many times did he knock his knees out from underneath him and throw him into the pit?
Yeah.
First a pit of a well by his brother selling him into slavery, and then the pit of a prison, And so, even for Joseph, he had found favor, but it sort of seemed like God knocked the knees out from underneath him a lot.
Like Job.
And yet was there anything that Joseph had done wrong? So how do we know whether or not we are facing judgment or controversy?
A couple of points. I think that Job, the message of Job is it's not our position to know. And that's where we get into trouble. When we say this must be a judgment of God, but we don't know that. Or this is a result of their sin, we don't know that. This is an act of the enemy, we don't even know that. There are principles that we can use. I think of the father that caught his son smoking a cigarette. So he gave him a whole pack of cigarettes and put a bucket over his head. And he said, that'll teach you to smoke. And is it effective? Depends on the psychology of the kid.
Yeah.
Some
kids that cures them. Some kids is like, oh, well, now I really like it.
God is sovereign and we are not.
Right.
There's also another point to look at. It wasn't anything that Joseph necessarily did, it was the consequences of somebody else's sin that he was suffering. It wasn't even anything that he had done.
Well, and I think that is a really key point too, because when I look at Job and his friends accuse him of doing evil, Job keeps coming back and saying, but I didn't. I did this, I love God. I didn't do anything against God. I know I am innocent. Job maintains his innocence throughout. And so I think when we're looking at whether or not is this judgment or is this the conflict of the great controversy of the devil attacking us, I think a lot comes down to what is the fruit? What is the fruit? What was the fruit of Job?
He was blessed even more so.
Well, he eventually became blessed even more so, but even so, when he searched his heart, he could find no sin that he had committed that of judgment. Now, when we look at the Canaanites and we search them, what is our judgment? You know, we look at, or Sodom and Gomorrah. In fact, Sodom and Gomorrah is a great example because when we look at Sodom and Gomorrah, do we know what was going on with them at that time? Why they deserved the judgment? We do. We have the whole story of the two visitors being basically assaulted. They were just coming in. They didn't do anything. They just came into town, and every man, according to Genesis, came to assault them. You look at that and it's like, yeah, but that their fruit was not a good fruit, right? Mm-hmm. We look at the evidence of their lives. Were they righteous? Were they not? There's evidence, right?
Well, for Job, the whole point was that he was supposed to blame God and curse God, and he didn't.
No,
So that was
that was again evidence of.
yeah.
So now let's take a look at our two stories that we're looking here. Now that we have the context here, and I'm already going way farther than I needed to go, and let's take a look at Rahab. And so we have Rahab, and what is Rahab's occupation? She's a harlot. Okay, so how does the Bible view harlots?
No bueno.
I think it's,
I often wondered, why did the men go there?
Well, it's not exactly like in those days they had hotels. They didn't have hotels. So where is the place of hospitality where you can spend the night? Maybe that was about the only place they could find to spend the night without being in the middle of the market square and camping in the market square, which is what the men of Sodom and Gomorrah were about to do. They were just going to camp in the town square, and Lot said, no, you better come to my house, right?
I thought of that too, the same thing, like, why did they go there? It's so obviously what is going on in there, but if I was thinking that if they would have went to like, I don't know, like a different place, that other place would want to get them. Or if they go to where prostitutes are, the prostitutes don't care, they just want money, they're not gonna go telling anybody, right? Like, that's literally like the safest place they could have been.
It's like the oldest occupation, and and who would suspect spies going to
Why would a
harlots?
prostitute have access even to the city government or whatever? Like, they probably wouldn't, so I don't know, I've thought.
Well,
the same
unless
thing.
she's like a high level temple prostitute,
Okay.
because they have that too, and there's questions about that too. But if she was a temple prostitute, she would also be someone who is serving the gods of Jericho. Did I just steal your thunder?
that very thing. The Israelites were expressly forbidden to take on the practices of the Canaanites that they were coming into, and Jericho was the oldest of the cities. Estimates nowadays put the founding of Jericho at 14,000 BC even, and it goes way back. Now, of course, the dating may or may not be correct in that regard, but by the time of Abraham, Jericho was old.
And it was probably a big city.
Yeah, well, we have the footprint of the walls because it's an archaeological dig site. But the practice of the Canaanites was that they would worship Asherah, the mother gods, and they would worship Baal. And Baal literally means Lord. And so when you see the word Lord in the Old Testament, oftentimes it's the word Baal. And Baal was the god of the rain. And it was believed that you had to excite Baal by copulating in his presence. And so these temple prostitutes were doing a service to Baal to bring out the rain. So it's not the red light district that we tend to think of. It is a religious practice. She was revered in her culture.
Wow, that's a different picture.
Yes, so, they're not necessarily going to the person of the lowest society. She might have been quite wealthy,
Well,
quite well-to-do.
I would even go as far as say that, the king of Jericho was on her client list.
He
I'll
could
tell you-
have been.
I'll tell you why. The fact that she lived right there on the city wall. She would have had a commanding view of the entire Jordan Valley, prime real estate. She was probably well favored by the king and his court. So she had prime real estate and, probably well.
Might be why they didn't question her too deeply.
Correct, so, it was any other person, they would have gone in and stormed her place and just ripped everything apart and gone through everything. But in this case, these guys came to you, where did they go? That's all it was.
Yeah.
And this was just a conversation opposed to just ripping her place apart and looking. So.
Yeah, and we don't get any details of how they ended up in her place. It could be that she invited them in. It could be she recognized them. Certainly somebody recognized them because they came looking for them, right? And so who they were was certainly known by somebody. And maybe even she recognized that and pulled them because she saw an opportunity. Because what was the feelings that was going on in Jericho at that time? So if we take a look at how they were feeling about it, let's take a look at Joshua 2:24. This is the report that Rahab gave to the spies. What insight did she give to the spies that they were able to share with Joshua in Joshua 2:24?
And they said unto Joshua, truly the Lord has delivered unto our hands all the land, into our hands all the land, for even all the inhabitants of the country do faint because of us.
So they were afraid, very much afraid of what these people were coming in. They knew their judgment had come. And they knew that this mass of people who were coming in to stay, and that they had God behind them.
And that was years that they knew what happened to the Egyptians, right?
Oh, it's 40 years later. Yeah. And several things have happened in those 40 years. Number one, that 40 years ago, which is like a lifetime ago, but still, they'd heard about the crossing of the Nile or the Red Sea. They'd heard about, they'd had battles with the Amorites or Ammonites. I get them all confused. Amalekites. They heard about their victory with the Amalekites.
Og of Bashan.
They'd already had Balaam happen with what happened there, and they'd already conquered territory on the other side of the river that was already firmly theirs. Okay, so they had a history. And now, actually, when they come and see Rahab, they had not even crossed the Jordan yet. They're still on the other side of the river. But these people are very nervous, and they haven't even crossed the river yet. And that's what the spies come and tell them. And Rahab has been listening and watching and thinking about these things. And so she protects them. And she asks an oath of them. So let's take a look at the oath. And it's found in Joshua 2, verses 12 through 21. So let's take a look at this oath. Joshua 2, verses 12 through 21.
Now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family, since I have helped you. Give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, you will let me live along with my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all my families. We offer our own lives as a guarantee for your safety from enemy. If you don't betray us, we will keep our promise and be kind to you when the Lord gives us the land. Then, since Rahab's house was built into the town wall, she let them down by a rope through the window. Escape to the hill country, she told them. Hide there for 3 days from the men searching for you. Then when they have returned, you can go on your way. Before they left, the men told her, we will be bound by the oath we have taken only if you follow these instructions. When we come into the land, you must leave this scarlet robe hanging from the window through which you let us down. And all of your family members, your father, mother, brothers, and all your relatives must be here inside the house. If they go out into the street and are killed, it will not be our fault. But if anyone lays a hand on people inside the house, we will accept the responsibility for their death. If you betray us, however, we are not bound by this oath in any way. I accept your terms, she replied, as she sent them on their way, leaving the scarlet robe hanging from the window.
Okay, so here we have the spies making a compact or an oath with Rahab. Is that a good thing?
Well, they think it is.
Huh?
I think they both think that it's a good idea, because she didn't waste any time. She put the rope out immediately. Well,
Right.
I mean, it kind of feels like that. I was like, oh, she doesn't wait, they'll probably be in a month, or she doesn't even wait for 3 days, like nothing, she just like immediately puts the rope out.
Yeah,
And then
she's
they are probably feeling like, okay, well, this is our best shot, I don't know, maybe.
right. Well, and they make it safely back, so they know that she's kept the oath, right? And it's actually probably a month, maybe even later, because between this point and when they actually start to walk around Jericho, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens. They cross the Jordan River, and then they do something that's like, why now? They circumcise all the men, so there needs some time for healing. And it's like, well, I think we get into that next week. It's just like, okay, shouldn't you have done that before you crossed the river while you're still safer? But anyway, they cross the river, they do all of this stuff, and they have to heal from that. I don't know how long it takes to heal from a circumcision, but I don't imagine it's the next day. And so they have to heal from that before they actually attack Jericho. So there is a time span that's gone between this, and yet she has faith and does not and never betrays them and what they're planning on doing.
She leaves that rope hanging.
And she leaves that rope hanging. And when they come, she's ready, as we see.
Let's just say that the men that Jacob's sons killed can give direct testimony
As to how
well they can fight.
how hopeless you can be after that, right? And God has them do it when they are at the most vulnerable. If
That was great, I love that.
yeah. So anyway, and then Jericho comes, and we're not going to belabor the story of Jericho. We're never going to get to the Gideonites, but she is rescued. Not only do the men keep their oath, but we have evidence and testimony that God kept the oath. How do we know that?
Well, because she's mentioned in the New Testament.
Number one, she's mentioned in the New Testament as part of the
Okay.
lineage of Christ himself. Okay. What other evidence do we have that even God helped keep that oath? What fell down?
Everything else
Oh,
went
yeah.
better.
Where's the house?
Yeah.
The walls came tumbling down, but where was her house? It was in the wall. But when they went to go get her, she was still safe.
Garstang's archaeology of the site, the walls are a jumble, except in one place.
Except in one place. We can point to her apartment practically, because even God kept the oath
that the spies had made with her to keep her safe. And I find that fascinating.
Well, it says, that by faith, he saved
Yes.
us.
James 2:25, let's take a look at that. And this is another interesting text. If we look at James 2:25 in regards to Rahab.
Which one's that?
2:25, James 2:25.
Likewise, was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way?
Okay. So even in the New Testament, even today, we can look at what Rahab did and see how her faith led to action and honored her by how she had faith that God would do it, and then she acted that God would protect her, and she became part of the lineage of Christ. And so we have that for us. Now let's get to the Gibeonites. I want to, because this story fascinates me even more. And I'd like to go ahead and start with Joshua 9, verses 1 through 5. Joshua 9, verses 1 through 5.
And it came to pass when all the kings were on the side of the Jordan, in the hills and in the lowland and in all the coasts of the great sea toward Lebanon, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite heard about it. Then they gathered together to fight with Joshua and Israel with one accord. But when the inhabitants of Gibeon heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they worked craftily and went and pretended to be ambassadors, and they took old sacks on their donkey, old wineskins torn and mended, old and patched sandals on their feet, and old garments on themselves, and all the bread of their provision was dry and moldy.
Go ahead and read verse 6.
And they went to Joshua to the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the men of Israel, we have come from a far country. Now therefore make a covenant with us.
Okay, so let's take a look at what's going on at this moment. So Jericho has fallen, Ai has fallen, and what are the other Canaanites doing?
Achan was Achan.
Grouping up.
Huh?
They're grouping up.
They're grouping up. There's safety in numbers.
Yeah.
They are making alliances to fight the Israelites. They have the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. There are 6 Canaanite city-states, armies joining together.
All the ites.
A lot of ites.
No,
All right,
just before
But
that,
what does Gibeon do?
Oh, Gideon is like, wait a second, let's go see if he'll make a deal with us. Yeah, well, he went to pretend. That he was something.
Well,
from a different nation.
they don't want to put their lot in with these other tribes. They look at what's happening and they're like, God is with the Israelites. Our safety is not in numbers.
Is this after the walls went down? or-
Yes, this is after Jericho. It's after Ai was destroyed.
Oh.
And they're looking and they're saying, our safety is not here. Where is our safety?
More importantly, it's right after the swearing of the oaths of the Israelites on Mount Nabal and
Gerizim? Or is it-
Gerizim,
Yeah.
right? So they have just declared the oaths of Deuteronomy. And now they're getting ready to go in and conquer the
Conquer the rest of the land. And the Gibeonites do not put their faith in the other tribe, the other Canaanites, the other tribes around them. They decide their best bet is with the Israelites. I find that fascinating because that is not a normal response to me. To me, the normal response is unite and conquer, right?
Can you imagine being there? This is not a huge territory. There the Israelites are, all 1.6 to 2 million of them on the hillsides of Gershom and Ebal. And they're pronouncing these oaths. This was not in private.
They're probably spies watching.
There are people from the hill countries all around looking at this thing, they, what on earth? And they know the stories. They know the story of the crossing of the Red Sea. It happened in their parents' day.
They just seen the crossing of
And
the
they
Jordan
just-
River
and
in
they just saw
springtime.
them- just heard about them destroying Og of Bashan, Zion, I forget the other guy's name.
Balak.
Yeah,
Yes.
no, it's not Balak.
Oh, but yeah.
But, and so here they are, and what's coming next? Their God's gonna act. And I have a hard time being hard on the Gibeonites. Because they were acting out of self-preservation. The foolish ones were actually not the Gibeonites, it was the Israelites.
Yes. So the Gibeonites, they disguise themselves, they come and say, they make it look like they have traveled months. Okay, to come and see the Israelites, and they puff the Israelites up a little bit, you know? It's like, we have heard from so far away how great your God is, and we would like to make treaty with you. And the Israelites, you know, they're starting to feel nationhood coming on. What do nations do? They make treaties and contracts with their neighbors. And there was suspicion. So we take a look at that they actually asked the question, verse 7. Will someone read verse 7?
And the men of Israel said unto the
Hivites.
Hivites, peradventure ye dwell among us, and how shall we make a league with you?
So they asked the question. Well, maybe you're our neighbor. Okay. What should the Israelites have done at this point? Ask God. They should have asked God, and God would have told them. Now, would the result have been the same? I don't know. I don't know. Because to me, the Gibeonites are different than the other tribes. But they don't ask God. And so they look at the physical evidence that is presented before them, and they believe the Hivites. And so then they go out and they start to march out against them, and then suddenly there they are, and they're saying, hey, you just made a deal with us. And they're like, oh my goodness. Now, my understanding of contracts and stuff like that, if a contract is made in ill faith, if there's a lie in a contract, should we be bound by it? If someone has purposely set out to deceive you in a contract?
Not by our standards.
Not by our standards, right? By our standards, hey, you contracted with me in ill faith. You purposely deceived me. I am no longer bound by that contract, right? But is that what the Israelites, is that the tack the Israelites took with this?
They cursed them.
They're like, you got us, right? And now we have to honor it.
Well, there was a problem. It wasn't just a contract. They had sworn an oath to God. And an oath to God cannot be broken. And the lesson brought out, was it Jephthah? Who swore an oath to sacrifice the first thing that came out of his.
And it was his daughter?
House, and it was his daughter. That contract could not be broken. Because it was an oath sworn in God's name.
Okay. And so the Israelites take this oath very, very seriously. They take it very seriously, even though it was made with deception. They recognize the mistake they made, but now how are they going to rectify that mistake?
Make them slaves.
Okay, so they decide that they're going to honor them. Now, there's something about this that I know when I was reading this, it was like, well, who were the Hivites? And then Rick and I did a little research and discovered that they were descendants of Ham's son Canaan. And I've been going through a Bible recap, and it started me in Genesis, and I got through Noah, and now it's having me going through Job. But when I was reading about Noah, I remembered something I read. So let's take a look at that. Let's look at Genesis 9. Verses 24 through 27.
And you might remember this story. It was after the flood when Noah grew some grapes and made the first wine after the flood. And it didn't go so well for Noah. But it worked even worse for his son Ham. So let's take a look at what Noah said about his son Ham in Genesis, and actually not even his son Ham, about his son's son, Canaan. So go ahead and let's read that. Genesis 9:24 and 27.
So Noah awoke from his wine in 24 and 27,
24 through 27.
from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done to him. Then he said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants, he shall be to his brethren." And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and may he dwell in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant."
So Canaan, because of the sin of his father Ham, is prophesied to be the servant of Shem and Japheth. Now, who do the Israelites descend from?
Shem,
They descend from Shem.
hence we get the word Semite.
So they are descendants of Shem. And so when I read this, it's like, wait a minute, prophecy is being fulfilled. Again, Canaan, in this relationship between the Gibeonites, who are now becoming perpetual servants to the Israelites and to the temple, have now become the fulfillment of Noah's curse.
They're servants.
They are now the slaves or the servants of Shem, or descendants of Shem. It's interesting sometimes how you see connections in the Bible come through. Now, I want to go back to the oath that was made. How long was this oath good for? To perpetuity. Okay, so let's take it. What happened to the Gibeonites and the rest of the Bible? Does anyone know?
I do now.
I do. It's really interesting. We're going to be reading in a couple weeks about what happens when the other kings find out what the Gibeonites did and how God uses that to help destroy them. We're going to be reading about that, but that had to do with the Gibeonites. The Gibeonites were involved with that. But even later, we hear about the Gibeonites again during Saul's day. Saul, in his zeal to get rid of everyone who wasn't Israelite, attacks the Gibeonites and destroys many of them. Not all of them, but many of them. And God is not happy. In fact, during David's day, there was a 3-year drought. And David's like, what's going on? And he goes to God and asks of God. And God said, it's because of what Saul did to the Gibeonites. Because you had an oath with them. And so David goes to the Gibeonites and say, we sinned against you. We broke our oath. What do you require of us? And they said, we don't want to exact a punishment from the people of Israel. We want to exact a punishment on the family of Saul. And so the Gibeonites, in their grace, because they could have asked anything for the crime that they had done to them and breaking that oath. But they just required the descendants of Saul, and David gave them all of the male descendants of Saul, except for one, and they were hung as punishment of the crime of Saul against basically almost eliminating all of Saul's descendants. And so God exacted that punishment. Even, let's see, David's got to be what, 500-600 years after this contract? And God still required that to be honored. 400 years. And then they appear again. Anyone else know when else they appear?
Ezra.
They appear in Ezra. Now, can anyone tell me who Ezra was and his significance in the Bible?
Was it either one that went to go rebuild?
Yes.
Just a scribe.
He was a scribe. He went to go rebuild. And Gibeon also, if you look up Gibeon, the city of Gibeon, you'll find out that the sanctuary was stored in Gibeon for a time, the tabernacle.
was what was housed there for a time. There are stories that Samuel was from that area. And so this area, the Gibeonites, it's only about 5 miles northwest or so of Jerusalem. You can actually see Jerusalem from the ancient city of Gibeon. It became a holy site. Solomon has his vision in there. But in Nehemiah 7:25, he lists all of the people who came back to Israel for the rebuilding of the temple. And it says the sons of Gibeon, 95. 95 sons of Gibeon came back to the temple. They became an integral part of the sanctuary process. Remember, they were told to be, they would be the water carriers and the wood cutters. They were the ones that cut the wood for the sacrifices. They were the ones who provided the water for the temple. It was their job. They became part of the religious practice of the Israelites. And eventually they become merged into them. You know, that I think Nehemiah is the last time we hear of them, but they become part of the indistinguishable from Israelites themselves.
So when all of these other kings have long been destroyed and their civilizations, the Gibeonites continue.
They can, then their oath is still honored. It's fascinating what God does. But it also tells us how important oaths are. When Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no, he is not saying don't make oaths because, no, he's saying, he's putting the bar up saying every word you say, every promise you make needs to be honored. And he demonstrates this in how he treated the Gibeonites, how he treated Rahab, and honoring the oaths that were made to these people, the Canaanites. I hear the time is up.
I have one question.
Yes.
After they destroyed Jericho, what were they, Amorites or whatever they were they all no more?
As far as we know. As far as we know. And now, in the case of, the modern definition, we'll circle around back to the modern definition of genocide, doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is destroyed. There may have been many people who escaped and merged in with other nations, and yeah. And so there could have been many people who chose not to fight and migrate out of that area. And so I can't say that all were completely annihilated for sure, but those who stayed were, as far as the Israelites were faithful. We do learn that they did allow some to stay, and that became to their detriment in the future. But anyway, let's go ahead and pray. Dear Lord, thank you so much for your blessing. Thank you so much for these stories that show us the importance of your word and your grace also to those who were doomed for destruction, but who you chose to save, and not only to save, but to turn into an integral part of your story, whose fate was determined from the very beginning and to the very end. And let us always have faith that you have us in your hands, and that we represent you, and that our word must be as your word, and that you will honor the oaths that we make as well. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.